Yeah. All right. Good morning, everybody. A little late start. I'll try to go through it quickly and not look up any passages, and we'll try to skip over a few sections. And that's fine. This morning, I would like to take a look at the Olivet Prophecy. In the past, I've been very confused about how to interpret the Olivet Prophecy. And since then, I've heard conflicting stories. And since then, I've actually started the Facebook Christadelphian Prophecy discussion group, and still have frequent discussions there about things that are puzzling to me about prophecy. So, and I want to say that I know that people have different opinions about prophecy. So nothing I say, of course, is in this particular thing, especially, is to be taken as dogmatic. And I'm always willing to change my viewpoint, and just basically just give you my current viewpoint, and then we can generate discussion some other time, or if you want me to show you the proof of whatever I think I understand later, I can certainly share my thoughts with anybody who's interested. And I know that there's a lot of people out there that know more than myself, and but some of the things I'm hoping, some of the things I'm saying will be helpful to some people, anyways. So, anyways, so I've approached this study prayerfully. I've read up on a lot of stuff, including, of course, this passage, and I've consulted several brethren for different aspects where sometimes I would be hung up on something with a question in my head, and that didn't make sense how things would fit together. And so I believe now my current understanding of Mount Olivet Prophecy is that it's a split prophecy, and that's, I guess, my special terminology. But what that means is that it's sort of two prophecies in one, or maybe even three, but that some events in the discourse were more immediately fulfilled, I'll say, but that somewhere the text switches over to cover a later period, further off, further in the future, and we might call end times part. And I'm aware that I think it's the Alfreys, either Mark or his father, somebody's written books on Olivet Prophecy or something, where they make the entire prophecy AD 70. And I've got some real problems with that, so I'll point them out a little bit as we go through. But first, I'd like to actually set the precedent that such a thing as a split prophecy, or that's actually a viable prophetic structure. And so I thought, before I go trying to interpret prophecies, I might as well first check and see, like, if the structure, like, I kind of want to get the basics down. Is there such a thing, and as this kind of a split structure, and study do I find that in other prophecies that I could actually justify that viewpoint, where you have this sort of a gap, some people call it gap, in two parts of the prophecy, where one was more immediate, and the other part, the latter part, was of the discourse, ends up being sort of more latter day. And so I decided it'd be reasonable to study the structure of prophecy itself first, and I figured that I would take a smaller, easier prophecy and try to understand the structure of that first. And so Obadiah seemed to be a good place to start, because the whole book is just one small chapter, and it seems to me that Obadiah is also an example of a split prophecy. It has some things that were fulfilled long ago, and yet a portion of the prophecy um, is seemingly reserved for the time of the end, and perhaps there's some overlap. And I could go through and prove that, but we have a lot of ground to cover, so I just like to hold off on that. Maybe if we have time at the end of the class period, we can look at some more details there. But it is what I would call not a dual fulfillment, because when I think of dual fulfillment, it's sort of like the whole discourse is fulfilled twice. But rather, I would call it a split fulfillment, or two prophecies in one, perhaps. In essence, it mentions the distinction of the Edomites and the complete desolation of their land, and those things are already past. But it ends up talking about the latter days as well, with actually the last verse mentions the kingdom of Yahweh with saviors on Mount Zion. So that's something that definitely hasn't occurred yet. To my knowledge, if you're if you're aware of something, let me know. But so what it appears to me is that this prophecy is actually split into two parts, two time periods. And Jim Cowie, he's of the position that verses 15 through 21 refers to what he calls spiritual Edom, and in the latter days, and that in particular, he believes it's the nations, or the nations particularly, that will afflict Israel in the time of the end. Maurice Stewart also wrote a commentary on the book of Obadiah, where he states verses 16 through 21, the prophecy is enlarged. So I think that most can see that there's some point in the prophecy at which the subject seems to kind of shift and change. In fact, in one verse, you can kind of almost tell by the language of what verse it is, because the focus switches from Esau or Edom to the nations. And so we're talking, like, we go from one nation to talking about multiple nations. And so not everybody will agree on what verse it sort of switches over, but or whether there might be even some overlap. But the main point is, though, that other brethren also agree that there is some point in this chapter where it switches over from a past fulfillment to latter days, or still future. And so it just seemed helpful to sort of getting started and studying prophecy, to sort of realize that certain kind of structures can exist in prophetic passages. And so I think that perhaps in other cases, the same structure can also be seen. I mean, we think of Daniel chapters 11 and 12. At some point, it switches over from talking about the Persian Empire, and then all of a sudden it says talk about the resurrection. And I've heard that explained away too, but yeah, there's and there it's really hard to tell where the overlap is, but there is a mention. It says in the time of the end, or something of that nature, but there still could be some overlap there. But now I think, with kind of that in mind, and I'd have to skip ahead now, and we'll just focus on the Olivet prophecy, because I think that is also a split prophecy, or two prophecies in one, or you can call it gap theory, or you can call it whatever you want. The first part, of course, referring to things that happened almost immediately, and the latter part reserved to the time of the end, something yet to be fulfilled. Now, as far as what other people's opinions, Jim Cowie believes that the Olivet prophecy should be properly dissected around Matthew 24 verses 29 through 30, somewhere in there. And Thomas and Mansfield both agree that from at least verse 30, the Lord is speaking of events pertaining to the latter days. And I don't want to be dogmatic about it again, but I kind of think the dissection actually comes a bit earlier. I think it's around Matthew 24, verse 23. And I won't go into details here on that, but let's just say it's a very wonderful thing, this age that we have technology, and you can create a spreadsheet if you're willing to spend the time, and you can carefully you can make a column for each chapter and put the separate, not each verse, but you can break the verses into separate parts where they agree, and then you can see which ones have the common fragments of a verse, and you can fairly quickly lay out all three Olivet accounts in parallel. That's Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. And in this way, it's easy to fill in the gaps and notice the details there that will help you sort of interpret the sequence and things of that nature. And also, you'll actually find, when you do this, you'll find actually some of the Olivet prophecy language appearing in other chapters as well. There's some in Matthew 10, there's some in Luke 12, and there's some in Luke 17. It's interesting that Luke seems to kind of take some of the things that are in the Olivet prophecy and the other books, and sort of they ended up in other chapters somehow. So I could give examples of that, but we won't get into detail. But you can bring these in, and they kind of help, a little bit with the sequence and so forth. And I don't, well, I'll be happy to go over the details of that with anybody at some other time. I'll share my my spreadsheet if they'd like to see it, and see how the accounts overlay each other. But basically what I found is there's kind of like the opening in Matthew kind of asks the disciples come and ask him basically the three questions, right? When shall these things be? Or these things was that these things that he was just talking about, the temple. Well, not one stone would be laying on another, and so forth. Another concern was the sign of thy coming, and another concern was the time of the end of the world. And so I think we could go through these really quickly. I think he answers all three of them in relatively sequential, orderly fashion. So the first concern was, of course, when shall these things be, when the temple will be destroyed? He says, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led captive, away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And this speaks of the period of AD 70, although some will say, no, it's actually the Bar Kokhba revolt of AD 131. Either way you like to take it, the point is that these events have happened already, right? And that's the main takeaway. The second concern, the second part of the question, was the answer to what is the sign of thy coming, and he refers to elements marking the days of the Son of Man, and this can be seen in Luke 17:22 or elsewhere, in Matthew 24:27, the coming of the Son of Man. And the third concern was an answer to the time of the end of the world, where he mentions the elements at the time when it says he shall gather his elect. And the elect in the prophecy, from the way it best fits together for me, the elect here refers to natural Israel. And there's precedent for that too, because he mentions the elect in the first part of the question where he's talking about AD 70, unless those days would be shortened, so forth. So the prophecy seems to refer to the elect of natural Israel, where it gets down to that point. So these three different answers to the three parts of the question are given more or less in order, as you would expect. But I think so for this class, I'd like to turn my focus to the events still future, or in very recent times anyways, or still future, the signs of Christ coming and the end of the world. And I think that we'll see there's definitely elements in here that would be very difficult to stretch to fit AD 70 time period. And I'm aware again that there's a version interpreting the Olivet Prophecy that asserts that it's already all been entirely fulfilled, but that's not I think what most people, I don't think, come away with that. And from my perspective, there's a lot of problems with that interpretation. And when we get further to the end of the passage, the more problems that seems to present. And I can't see the coming of Christ here referring to coming in judgment against Jerusalem in the form of a siege, for several reasons. That it's portrayed here as a positive thing. Christ's coming in the context of this prophecies, it's seen as a good thing, not a time to dish out punishments only. First of all, Jesus warns them, don't go out after false Christs, which indicates that his coming is something they are looking for. They're seeking. The days will come when ye shall desire to see one of the days of the Son of Man, and ye shall not see it. So these people are desiring to see the coming of the Son of Man. So why would they desire to see the siege on Jerusalem? That wouldn't make sense. Secondly, is the point that they're told to lift up your heads, your redemption draws nigh. In Luke 21, which you'll see by overlaying the three accounts, the time at which this takes place. And so how can the redemption of the saints, or whether Jewish or not, be associated with the siege on Jerusalem? And furthermore, check it and see that the coming of the Son of Man with great power and glory, or coming in the clouds, it occurs when the powers of the heaven are shaken, which is immediately after the tribulation of those days. So after the tribulation, the Gentile kingdoms are shaken, and then shall the tribes of the earth mourn, because this is after the tribulation upon the Jews. The shaking of the heavens now corresponds to the overthrow of some nations, which I believe this is referring to the overthrow of the nations of Gog. But the timing here would not make sense if this is AD 70. So it makes more sense, I think, when it's speaking of the tribulation that precedes Armageddon. Now, Joel 3:16 says, the Lord also shall roar out of Zion and utter his voice from Jerusalem, and the heavens and the earth shall shake, but the Lord will be the hope of his people and the strength of the children of Israel. So here's the shaking that we're talking about, where the heavens are shaken. It's talking about the end of Gentile times now, and it's talking about the Gentile kingdoms being shaken. And we know that at the end of Hebrew, that terminology, shaking, I will shake once more, not only the earth, but the heavens. So that in its it says, and yet the kingdom is going to remain in place. So what we have here is all the other kingdoms falling away and one kingdom remaining. That's the kingdom of God. So the language is pretty consistent in most places, that this earthquake in the heaven language is talking about nations falling, the nations of the Gentiles. And then it says that at that time, lift up your heads. Now, this is when the Jews will lift up their heads because their redemption is near. So this cannot possibly be about Jesus coming in judgment before the tribulation, because it says he comes after the tribulation. So the tribulation we see in Matthew, for example, Matthew 24:29, I believe to be the time of Jacob's trouble, that brings Armageddon, which is still future. And so that leads us to the real subject of this class, which is regathering, the theme of regathering, which all we've looked at up until this point has been sort of lead into this, to kind of wanted to actually cement down that we're not looking at AD 70, this just to kind of reinforce that. So to look at this way, there's a very strong theme here in this, at the end of this prophecy, about regathering. And the theme is so strong that sometimes you see several elements in a passage of scripture, and you think, oh, this passage of scripture could be interpreted this way or that way. And sometimes you find enough clues that it's like a fingerprint, all the points on a fingerprint. You can get enough points on a fingerprint, and you have basically what some crime detectives would say, that's a match, and so I think that you kind of, for me, I kind of use that as a tool to help interpret. Sometimes I see enough patterns lining up, and I go, yeah, I think this is the right, what the theme is here that it's actually talking about. So again, I want to emphasize this gathering is natural Israel, remembering that the audience here is still purely Jewish. The living and dead saints have already been raised, and they are basically these clouds that Christ comes with, that's mentioned here. And elsewhere it mentions, we learned that the first thing that Christ does when he descends from heaven, he says he descends from heaven with a shout, and the first thing he does is raise the dead, and we will be caught up together with them in clouds. 1 Thessalonians 4:17, or we become these clouds, basically. So here, when he comes in the clouds, the saints should I believe already be there. And I kind of worked this out, and later found out that I guess Mansfield believed the same thing and wrote about it in Logos or someplace. So I was pleased that it wasn't just me that came to that conclusion. So this being in the air, or becoming like in the clouds, is, of course, we're using spiritual language here, not talking about floating around in the sky. We're talking about being in the group of amongst the angels, and in the future kingdom age, in their immortal format. So, and this is consistent, I think, with what we're told in Revelation 16, that Jesus comes, he says, like a thief. In other words, unannounced. He comes prior to Armageddon. So it all seems to fit together coherently, and from that aspect. So now, one thing, just to not to belabor the point, but I like to bring out this point that this passage talks about the regathering together of the elect of Israel. And just to reemphasize that that does not sound like AD 70, because AD 70 was the opposite of that. AD 70 was the scattering. So I try to turn this into AD 70. I don't know. I can't see how they get there. But be that as it may, I'd like to point out that there's a few signs here that reinforce the theme of the gathering of Israel in this section about the end of the world. You remember also the parable that the harvest is the end of the world and the reapers are the angels. That's kind of seemingly what we have here. Is we have, Jesus says Jesus will send his angels and gather his elect from the uttermost parts of the earth, in Mark 13:27. So here he uses the word gather. He specifically uses the word gather. So that's one aspect where we believe this talking about gathering or regathering. But also the sign of the trumpet. It's mentioned in Mark 24:31 account. It's in the exact same context. It's in the same verse where it says that the trumpet is for gathering, and the trumpet was a sign for a few different things actually. But one of the things that's a metaphor or used for was gathering, the regathering and gathering of Israel. And Jesus here seems to be citing Isaiah, where he describes the great trumpet, and that's in Isaiah 27:13. It's the great trumpet that will be blown at the time of Israel's final regathering and deliverance. The other passages showing that trumpets signify gathering and regathering, if you have time to look them up later, are Numbers 10:4, Joel 2:15, and Jeremiah 4:5. So the trumpet's a very appropriate symbol for gathering. So that's definitely the theme here, is gathering. There's no way you could cast that into AD 70 framework that I know of. If time, also read Isaiah 27:12, where to get that context. And in the King James here has kind of a poor translation. The New King James is better. It has, and it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord will thresh. And this is speaking of bringing home an abundant quantity of Jews from Egypt and from elsewhere. It's the Aliyah, or what's literally the going up. So you can think of it as coming home, right? And so another gathering image or feature that we have here is the fig tree. And we know that the fig tree's classically been a symbol for natural Israel, for Israel. And we've read the passage about naughty figs, and I think the King James naughty figs, or my fig tree kind of bears figs sometimes a little bit out of season, and then they're worthless. They just kind of never ripen and they shrivel up and fall to the ground. But so there was a time in Israel's history where the fig tree wasn't putting forth good fruit, and so that was that passage. So there's the thing about the fig tree here is I'd like to recall Aaron's rod. Aaron's rod was a dead branch, and it put forth buds. Aaron's rod that budded, and that is a symbol of resurrection from the dead. I mean, I couldn't think of a clearer symbol than to take a dead branch, a piece of wood, and then have it start budding and coming to life again. So this tree, this fig tree, budding forth new shoots, obviously to me seems very strong symbolism that it's speaking of the resurrection of the nation of Israel, the resurrection of Israel as a nation. And we've seen that. We've seen that in our recent times here. So and what a miracle it is, of course, that that took place in that establishment. And so God's hand definitely at work. And so, but this again, I want to just to make another point. This is again another thing that you could think of as this is just the opposite of AD 70. The fig tree budding is not AD 70. Okay, so no matter what you do, you just can't fit that. It doesn't seem to fit. So anyway, I kind of beat the dead horse or whatever, but on that one, sorry. But so this is the thing that that I guess John Thomas was looking for, right? He started looking for it, and he would have loved to see, when it was proclaimed, the things that he predicted, right? There is then a partial and primary restoration of Jews before the manifestation of the Lord Jesus Christ, which is to serve as the nucleus or basis of future operations in the restoration of the rest of the tribes after he has appeared in the kingdom. The pre-adventual colonization of Palestine will be on purely political principles, and Jewish colonists will return in unbelief of the messiahship of Jesus and of the truth as it is in him. So, yeah, what time we got here? So I'll just like conclude. I would say that that the prophecy mainly concerns itself with the Jewish viewpoint. And another point is that, to me, the Olivet prophecy is now looked at this way, clear and coherent. Are there issues still that need to be worked out? Probably. And I think, I've seen some things that I still want to go back and work through some of the more detailed things to see if it still fits together. I still have questions, but I think that overall the prophecy is clear and coherent, and there is a gap. It's not all about AD 70. The order of events are fairly easy to comprehend. It is, of course, made much easier if you use a spreadsheet and you line up and compare all of the words of Jesus and try to discern the order. And you'll find some places where, for example, where he mentions, the earthquakes and the famines and the pestilences, you'll notice little things in one of the gospels where you won't find in other. For example, in Luke, right after he mentions the earthquakes and the pestilences, and he says, but before all of these things. So what that means is, of course, you can take what he just said and move it somewhere else later down in the prophecy, but it doesn't really figure out. It's kind of hard to figure out where you're supposed to insert that, but at least the order is that one's out of order. So by comparing the different accounts, you can kind of see a little bit better where things, the certainty of where things do belong or might belong, and you can figure out which of the time placements, wherever you put the events occurring in whatever order, how certain you are of those things or not certain. And another conclusion is from this that there is still a future tribulation. But beyond that is, of course, the promise of a joyous age. God will again, he'll again bring the captivity of Jacob for the last time. It's the last time the captivity of Jacob will have to be returned from somebody else's land. And Ezekiel 39, by the way, is quite clear about it. It refers to the land of Israel as their land. And when it's talking about that he's punishing them for the sins that they did while in the land, and it refers to it as their land in a few places in Ezekiel, actually, to be non-ambiguous about it. So the last time that they'll be returned again, and he'll have mercy on his people Israel, the whole house of Israel, forevermore. And so those are some of the beautiful things that come out of this study. And again, I'll just say I approached the study very carefully and prayerfully, and spent a lot of time looking at it and talking to other people. And I may be proven wrong. And if so, I'm glad to come back and redeliver another class with whatever revisions are necessary. But yeah, that's pretty much the end of what I have to say. Again, we can go back and look at more details in Obadiah or anything like that. But I think if we have time, we'll open it to discussion. And by the way, I won't be able to hear maybe people talking in the hall, so I don't know how to fix that.
Hello.
Jonathan has a question or discussion.
Hello. I just, you talked about prophecies having an immediate and future application. In actuality, all the prophets have that because they're supposed to have that, because that's what the sign of their prophecy being true is. If they don't have that, they shouldn't be in the Bible. This is Deuteronomy 18:22. When the prophet speaks in the name of the Lord and the thing does not happen or come true, then that is the thing which the Lord has not spoken. That prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You're not to be afraid of him. All prophets have an immediate and future. Now, whether they're mixed up in the same passage or we've been separated by chapters, in the same speech or not.
Yeah.
But they all prophets speak of immediacy and future.
Yeah, that occurred to me that makes sense, because if you hear a big long prophecy, you don't know if it's true or false. You're just like, well, let's see if part of it came true. Okay, the first part of it came true, but the second part hasn't. So, right, that makes sense from that standpoint. And again, a small study to start out with would be something like Obadiah, where you could listen to different brethren's viewpoint on how to interpret Obadiah. And of course, there are people that believe that it's all talking about the same period of time, or it's not, or there's different ways of looking at. Some people believe that that Esau blood still runs in the some of the Arab peoples today, or so forth and so on. And I went and looked at that. And from my viewpoint, I heard Jim Cowie making claims that Edom is completely extinct as a people. And he pointed to the accounts by Josephus, and Josephus was there during the siege, and Josephus recorded a lot of details. And Josephus seems pretty credible, because where there was something that was a little bit sort of sketchy, he sort of padded it with disclaimers such as, well, this is a remarkable thing that people are saying, and it might be true, I don't know, but here it is for you to evaluate, and So he wasn't just making really wild claims or something without some sort of like, so where you don't see the sort of disclaimer padding stuff in his writing, there seems to be like there would be a fair amount of credibility. So Josephus says that one came, Simon of Gerasa or Gerasa, I don't know how you pronounce it, came with his army and rounded. First, he went through and destroyed most of Edom, all of the land that was, previously lush and green. Yeah, I can quote a little part here. Let's see where he said that.
Well,
He said basically they turned it into a desert. Oh, Josephus said they made the ground that was cultivated harder and more intractable than that which was barren. In short, there was no sign remaining of those places that had were laid waste, that ever they had a being. That's in Josephus Wars 479.
yeah,
But
it depends on whether you think there are discussions of things like Edom means a particular land or people.
well, hold on.
Because-
Then he said
Yeah,
the next thing later he says that he rounded up all the Edomites that were left and drove them into the siege. So they were in Jerusalem and were basically sucked into the siege and got, trapped by was it Titus or whoever was. So and apparently they were just never heard from again. I mean, that you don't find any other mention of Edom in history later after that, and you don't find any nation today claiming to be descendants of the Edomites. So it seems to me like I thought, this was like a little bit of detective work. Is Jim Cowie right? Let me go fact checking, and I thought, by golly, he's right, So
but
the Edomites, so that part of the first part of Obadiah is fulfilled and took place, and the second part, it speaks about Edom. So Jim Cowie believes that to be spiritual Edom and refer to the nations, and he's got several references to back that up. So it seems to me pretty coherent way to translate Obadiah.
oh, I don't mind about the first part with Edom being destroyed. As a matter of fact, I think that happened to them a number of times. The Babylonians did this pretty good job on them as well back in the day, and practically destroyed them. And ones that left became part of Israel. They're called Edomians instead of Edomites, and like Herod was one.
Yeah, this was before AD 70. Herod was
Oh,
Edomite, and all Edomite rulers were notoriously evil. Agag.
yeah. But so Idumeans who become part of the general population of Israel, whether that strain, genetic strain, is still there as part of Israel is what I'm saying, is you don't know. So talking about Edom, and there's a lot of places where these things are used symbolically to represent groups of people, right? Like Egypt and Assyria is as well, and they are mixed in not only with prophecies of destruction, but with prophecies of restoration.
Right.
So Edom can be used in the same way as some of the other things can, in the same
Yeah.
way, so that they're not talking necessarily about the particular people, but rather what they represent.
So yeah, so that's another
Yeah,
point is I didn't want to get into I didn't
yeah,
want to be dogmatic about whether Edom in the latter day part of the prophecy refers to some nation that has natural Edomite blood still by some chance, or whether it refers to a spiritual entity, spiritual Edom, as it seems to be a thing. Like it seems a theme that Jim Cowie, to me, I think he argues that point well. And
yeah.
just leave it there.
The,
But again, it's not the focus of the discussion.
yeah.
It is sort of a side topic that's interesting to consider.
Okay, Mark, I don't know if you can hear me here, but I
Yeah.
think we have our sound system going in the hall. Okay, so
Good.
we're just going to finish off our Sunday school just now.
Okay.
I'm just going to come up the front because I'm up at the back, but I have two microphones with me, which means that everyone can hear, which is great. Thank you for your talk today, Brother Mark.
I'll go ahead and thanks. I'll go ahead and unrecord.
Oh.